Hi friends, welcome back to Connerty Meadows Farm. Today we are going to make something useful out of what would have been discard here on the farm. We are going to make a reusable shopping bag or a tote out of grain bags. I don't know about you guys, but here on our homestead, we don't like to waste product or put things in the landfill if there's another way to avoid it. So today, given that it's a dreary, rainy fall day, I'm standing just inside the door of the barn. I am going to work on one of the things that I call my winter projects. On our farm, just like many other farms, we buy our grain from the feed store, and we get them in these grain bags. And this is from one of our local stores. Okay, and we use these for garbage pickup, we use them for storage, we use them to store our twine. There's lots of things we use those bags for. If you've watched any of my gardening videos or how to make a garden bed, I actually use a lot of them in garden beds. My parents have a neighbor who uses them for sandbags. So we do try to reuse them as much as possible. But today what we're going to talk about are these ones. I like to call these ones the pretty bags. With these bags, I make them into shopping totes, reusable shopping totes. They're kind of waterproof, they're very strong, and I get to reuse really cute ones with animals on them, and I'm saving something from going into the landfill. So the first thing we're going to have to do, and I'm going to do this outside, is we're going to take the bottom part of it off. And the reason I do this outside is in case there's any grain bits or anything in here. I don't want that in the house. And I'm going to do that for a number of them. We're going to go into the house, and then we're going to wash them. I'm going to put them in the tub with some soap and some water, and I'm actually going to scrub them down and wash them. Because I do sell these at a number of craft shows and just locally, and I don't know if someone's allergic to something, and I definitely don't want all this farm yucky going into my house or their house. Now that we have the ends off, we've come in the house, and I'm just filling the tub with a little bit of water, grab some soap, and I'm scrubbing it down with my hands. I don't use anything abrasive, I just use my hands and I scrub it all down. After you've done the outside, turn it inside out and wash the inside of it. When it's all nice and clean, I rinse it off. And then I put them like this on towels in the home. And I let them dry. Now that they're all dry, we're gonna turn them back inside, so inside right, so we can take a picture. The next thing that we're gonna have to do is we are gonna have to figure out where on here that we want to be showing. Now, usually what I aim for is I'll aim for the picture of the animal. But we have to do some measuring. One of the first things we're gonna do is if you look on your bag, you'll see originally at some point there's creases on the side of the bag. And you're gonna go ahead and find those creases. And we're gonna crease them back together. So, let me just show you up close here. This is what the edge of the bag looks like. If you look, you can see that there was creases there and there. So we're just re-creasing them on both sides. So now, you're gonna look like that, with the sides like that. Okay, for this next step, you're gonna need a ruler. I use a cutting board. You can use a good pair of shears or a cutting knife. I have the cutting board because I like to use the knife. Now, if you want a nice square bag, then the next thing we're going to do is we're going to measure the size of the bag. And this one's about 41 inches, so somewhere in that range. So then what you're going to do is you're going to find the pitcher. So I'm gonna go for the chicken here. And you're going to want the height the same as the width. So figure out on here, 41, that would be about, if I went from the 40 or 40 even, I could make this really easy by going from the green line down here to the 41 up here, which is approximately in the middle of the complete and balanced feed for poultry, right there. Now, what we do have to do is we have to account for seam allowances. So, we need to account for, up here on the top, we need 2 extra inches added for a seam allowance. Then, to get your seam allowance on the bottom part, we actually have to go and open up this flap and measure this part. And this is 12 in here for me. So we're actually going to add half of this amount, which is going to be 6. So remember how we said from the bottom of this line was where we were going to count for our face. Well, then we're going to need to add 6 to the bottom of this line, and that is going to account for our seams and our hems. So let me draw that out for you so you can understand it. We're going to pretend this piece of paper is our bag. The width of our bag from side to side was 16 inches or 41 centimeters. Then what we need to do is find the pitcher. So here's our pitcher. So our bag was 16 inches or 41 centimeters from side to side. So from side to side. Our pitcher is here in the middle. And then what we want to do is say, okay, this is the spot that I want my pitcher to be. So we need to measure our 16 inches or 41 centimeters here. Then, so say this is our square there. Okay, then we need to account for a seam allowance. So we are going to do a 1-inch seam allowance, but then we're going to be folding this over. So we actually have to account for an extra 2 inches. So plus 2 inches on the top. Then the next thing we need to do is we need to open our bag and figure out what we're here, which is 4.5. So half of 4.5, which is 2.25. So then we need to add here 2.25 inches to the bottom, giving our total height here 16 plus 2, which is 18, plus 2, which is 20.5. I'm going to note here that I am adding another 0.25 inches to this whole bottom area. That's why I say 2.5 instead of 2.25, for the simple matter that when you sew the seam on the very bottom of this bag, which you will see in a little bit, we're actually putting a double seam, so I need that little extra 0.25 inches to account for that double seam. So we need to measure 20.5, and then we're going to cut. So we're going to cut, and we're going to cut. So let's go ahead and do that on the real thing. I had already said that I wanted to use this baseline. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to measure my extra 2.5 below that. And then we're gonna mark that. And then we're gonna do the same thing on this side. 2.5. Mark that. And now you can cut from your marks. Now, you can use scissors, like I said, and go from mark to mark. But I use my cutting board, and then I'm just able to take my cutter and I get a perfectly straight line. And we're going to do the same thing on the top. So we're going to remeasure. We wanted from this part here, or you can just measure all the way from the bottom, whichever works for you. I'm going to measure from this line here because it's a nice solid line. So we had 16, plus we need our seam. So we're going to 18, which is just there. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to mark that, which was just above the white here. The same thing on this side. And then, same thing. Again, this can be cut with scissors. You don't need fancy stuff like I have. I just do a lot of sewing, so I have a lot of other extra stuff. And then, we cut that. And this is going to be the start of your bag. Okay, but we're not done with this stuff yet though. So we do have a few more things to do. And the one thing that we're gonna need to do is handles. And what we're going to do is measure 3 inches for the handles, because we're gonna actually fold them over, and I'll show you all those steps in a minute. Right now, just mark 3 inches on both sides. And then go ahead and cut your 3 inches, which is going to be your handles. And now this piece is actually a discard, and same with the top piece. So while you're still going to have recycling, you're not going to have a full bag. And now this piece, what we're going to do is you feel around on your piece, you'll see that there's a junction point. It's much thicker than the rest. So you're going to take that junction point and you're going to cut it. So find the junction point and then just cut that junction point off. We don't need that right now. This is actually pretty hard for the sewing machines to sew as well. And then we are left with this big long strip. The next step we're going to do is we're going to take what would be our handle, and we're going to fold it basically into 3 pieces. And you can just use your fingers to crease this down. And just go down the whole length. I also like to use the edge of the sewing machine table to get a nice strong crease. And the next step is we're gonna sew. So what we're gonna do is right along where this folds over, we're gonna sew that whole length all the way down to the bottom. You don't need to back stitch these because this part here is going to be going underneath your bag anyway. Cut off your extra bits. Now you'll have a big long strip. The next thing we're gonna do is we're just gonna take our strip and we're gonna fold it in half. So there's our strip. And then we're gonna cut the strip. And that becomes our two handles. Now we'll set those aside. Let's go back to our grain bag now. Now, after we've done our handle, we're actually gonna take our grain bag and we're gonna turn it inside out again. Now find your sides, the middle. So if you see here, there's 3 lines here. This is where we're gonna fold it, but this is where you want, is the middle part. Right here. Just crease that up just so you know where it is. Now that our bag is inside out, we are going to fold our top hem. So make sure you get the top of your bag. And remember we said we wanted a 1 inch. Need to measure, that was a pretty good guess. So 1 inch, and we're gonna fold this all the way around the bag. That is our first fold over. Now we're gonna fold it one more time. I like to take my ruler and that just helps with the edges. Now this is the top of the bag and we are going to be attaching our handles to the top of the bag. We're going to do some more measurements again. What we are going to do is we are going to measure 6 inches in and just use a small pencil, mark your 6 inches, and the same thing on the other side. 6 inches, mark it, flip it over. So what this will look like is your handle will be stitched in underneath like this. One thing to note here, where it folded over on your seam here, so this is where it folded over, you want that down. So that means that when you sew it in, the fold over part that you stitched is facing the white part of your bag. And then make sure when you twist the handle around to sew it in, you don't accidentally twist like this where it gets all. You've got to keep it all facing the same way. So again, your seam is down and against the white. Now the other thing to note here, so you can see where my mark is, right here. This handle is going to go on the inside of that mark, and the same thing on this side, on the inside of that mark. Then what we're going to do, you're going to start stitching over here in this corner, so that when you do your forward and back to lock it in place, it's not as visible. And then you're going to stitch all the way down, all the way around, sorry, like this. You're going to stitch down all the way around, and then you're going to do the same thing on the other side. I'll go show you. This is pretty tricky to sew with. If you actually have a sewing machine that's elevated, that you can wrap this around, I suggest that's the one to use, but this is what I've got. So make sure when you're stitching that you are not getting the bottom part. You kind of got to push it out of the way a bit. So we're going to find our corner, and that's where we're going to start to stitch. Okay, so there we are on our corner, and our mark is up here, so we can just stitch freely for the moment. So we've reached our first mark. We need to slow down when we see that mark coming. Get our strap, find which side has the joint, put that side down, and slide it in underneath, and line it up next to, so the line is on this side. Okay, and then we can just go ahead and keep stitching. I can see my next line is coming up, so I'm gonna need to slow down before that next line because this has to go around. So there's my next line. I slowed down with some room to spare. Remember again, seam side down. And now my line is here, but my handle is on this side of that line. Line it up, and we're gonna keep stitching. Your sewing machine might groan a little bit on this junction point because it's pretty thick. Old Granny here, she doesn't complain about too much. My next line is coming up here. And there, your first seam is done. The next step is we're actually going to sew all along the top seam here, but we're going to fold these up when we sew so that they're nice and secure. So this part here that was down, we're going to fold it up, and then we're going to stitch all the way around this top part. The other thing we're going to do is when we get to this, we're going to make a box around it, and we're going to sew some crosses and diagonals just to make sure this is very well attached. Again, you're going to start back in that middle. Okay, so we've reached where our handle is going to go. We're going to flip it up, and then we're going to keep sewing. Okay, so we've sewn our handle. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to turn our bag. Then we're going to sew downwards. Now we're going to sew on a diagonal. We're going to do it in reverse. And when we get to this corner, we're going to turn, and we're going to sew downwards again. And then we're going to turn, and we're going to sew the bottom part. There's no real right or wrong way to do this. I make a lot of extra stitching on the handles just to make sure that I've got them all in place. And after we're sure our handle is really well attached, we're going to keep sewing. Let's have a look at that handle making up close. And then we're gonna go back to sewing. Now that we have all of our top done and our handles done, we're gonna go to the bottom of the bag. And this part is actually pretty easy. You're just gonna sew a straight line as close to the bottom as you can, and then you're going to put one right beside it. So you'll have two straight lines next to each other. Because this is the bottom of the bag and we want it to be super strong. Now you don't have to back stitch on either one of these, and you'll see why in a little moment. You remember how I talked about we needed that extra 0.25 or 1/4 of an inch for hemming, and this is where that 1/4 of an inch comes into play, because we need that little extra 1/4 for these two seams going through. Okay, that's one. Now do the second one. Clean up your edges. This next bit is going to be a little bit more tricky. Do you remember when we talked about needing to find the creases on the side of your bag? So now you're going to need to find those creases again. Put your hand inside your bag. And there. When you see that, you're going to make a triangle of the corner. So this is your bottom seam, and this is the side of your bag. And what you're going to do is you're going to take your middle seam and you're going to feel to line up with your bottom seam back here. So now I can feel through my middle, the back seam, and just fold it kind of flat. Now, find your side seams again. So one of mine is here, and the other one is here. Now that you've marked your two sides, you're going to sew across from side to side and back stitch on each side, because this is a finished seam. Now you could draw a line across, but I'm just gonna eyeball it. Then do the same thing on the other side. Alright, so this is what you're left with. Got some little flyaway corners here and an inside out bag. What you gotta do is you gotta turn it inside right. I find the easiest thing to do is to take your little corner, tuck it in, put your hand in your bag and grab that corner. Then you need to poke the corners out. And you have a bag. Now to make it sit a little bit better, I'll grab the two sides, like that, and I will press that down. And what that'll give you is a bag that will actually stand up on its own. And you have a finished bag. Sorry, kitty cat wants to get in on it. And there you go. So that's what it looks like, all done. And there, you can probably see a little bit better. So there's the flaps. You can just push those down. And reusable shopping bag. AC, I have a task for you. There's a pumpkin in the bin up there. Can you get it for me?
Thanks for hanging out with us on the farm. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.